Hello everyone and welcome back to the Habit Tracker Minimal API course. In this video we will continue on the topic of routing the requests inside our Minimal API. We will take a look at parameter binding, how that's done, how to inject services into our API methods, and as well take a look at the special parameter types that we can leverage in our API. If you like this kind of content and would like to see more, feel free to subscribe to the channel. This will help me a lot. Okay, so let's dive straight into it. In our previous video, we kind of touched a little bit on the topic of parameter binding with this from route attribute over here, which we would use to bind the value to our ID parameter over here. Frankly speaking, you don't really need this from route attribute because the framework by convention will try to map it for you if you have the same name, if the parameter over here has the same name as the one described inside the path. So basically we don't need this attribute over here, so we can safely remove as well this using statement. You just have to make sure that the name of the route parameter over here and the name of the variable that we pass is the same, and the framework will bind it for you. However, that's not all, so we should take a deeper look at all the other conventions that we have in place. Now, you've probably noticed that I've added an iRepository interface with some basic root methods, and you might have a question: how do I inject the implementation of this iRepository, which we have over here, which is a habit repository? It's not yet using any framework or any ORM. It's basically just working with a list, in-memory list of habits. So the dependency injection part is really done before the builder.build part over here in our program.cs. If you remember from the way we were doing it in .NET Core 3.1 or even before, we had the services. Basically, we can get there by using builder.services, and we have all the methods that we previously had for resolving our dependencies. Basically, add scoped, add singleton, add transient, and much more. We all have it here. For the demo purpose, I'll be using it as a singleton. Basically, I'll add a iHabit repository with a habit repository implementation. So yeah, as said, all the dependency injection resolutions will be done before the builder.build. Afterwards, it's not an option to do that. So how do we inject it into our API methods? Well, that's pretty easily. We can get it like this, app-map-get. Inside here, let's define API v1 habits for now. And over here, inside the lambda, we just specify repository get all habits async. And because our repository method is really async, we can specify over here, and I think I'm missing a installation token over here, and as well await this call. So pretty easily, we just have to pass it inside our API methods. So now I should briefly explain how the framework will handle all of this. So basically, when we start our application, the framework itself will scan all our API endpoint definitions and try to map the things we have in here. So it will first try to map the iHabit repository and see if we have a defined implementation for it configured inside our dependency injection container. Then it will try to take a look at the route parameters and the variables that we pass in here and try to map them as well. Finally, it will try to map all the parameters that it didn't find inside the routes themselves as query string parameters. If you wonder for get methods, how, well, basically we can specify it from the route or from the query string. For the post methods, we have convention as well. So basically it's as easy as just passing the model that we need in our post method as a variable. So for example, if we have it like this and then just await repository add habit async and just pass in the model. So it's really just this easy, where we just specify it over here as a variable and it will automatically map it to the model itself. Okay, the next part would be just to remove all the junk stuff we have over here and start writing down the API methods that we need. So I'm going to remove everything over here and start with a clean slate. So a small disclaimer over here. We are not really binding the API methods to the repository that we have defined in our data access layer. We will bind the repository to a service that runs inside our business layer logic, which will be the one called from the minimal API, from the endpoints. That way we can swap, for example, minimal API to controller-based approach and not lose anything. If we have logic defined inside our API method handlers, in my opinion, it will be cumbersome just to replace it further down the line if we need so. For example, from REST-based to a gRPC-based approach. So in order not to waste time of the video, I've pre-written the methods that we need. So here they are. They are basically a direct implementation of all the methods we have in our iHabit repositories. So what we have over here, the first one is getHabitsAsync, which receives a repository injected and a cancellation token. The next method is more familiar since we've used it in our previous video, which basically takes an ID parameter from the route itself and then passes it over to the getHabitAsync method. So for the post method, I will leverage what the framework has to offer me and not specify over here the from attribute, from body or from form attributes over here. So we don't need to specify those. It will automatically map it to this model. And the rest are basically the same, but just a little bit different, where we have a map put, same thing with the model. We have a delete that gets a route parameter. We have a map put for updating the habit status, which basically takes in two route parameters and a repository. We have a get for the calendar, which takes same thing, route parameter, injected repository, passed and cancellation token. A fun thing that we could do when calling our API is do something like this. So v1 habit 10, for example, calendar, and in here specify query param, which basically October. We would pass in the month as October, and how we would do the mapping of this parameter is the same as with other ones. So basically we just have it like this. The framework will try to map the month to the query parameter that we have over here by convention, which is really awesome. We can as well use a from query attribute, but yeah, this is really redundant. The framework will do this for us without us having to specify it. This is basically a couple of approaches, well, a couple of things that I wanted to show you about parameter binding. We could do even more and take a look at how we could upload an image on avatar of our user into our API. It would look something like this. We can use the iForm file interface over here to upload a single file, or if you have use cases where you want to upload more than one file, you could use the iForm file collection and upload them as a batch. Okay, small thing over here is basically authenticated file upload is really supported inside minimal APIs using the authorization header, using a client certificate or a header. So for the next part of the video, I don't really need these two methods over here, and we should take a look at basically any of the methods that we have defined. You should really ask me probably what's with the cancellation token. And how do we get it and why it's there? Well, why it's there is the easiest question to answer. Is basically we are using it for long-running requests. For the ones that change state, I'm not really using it right now, and I'm not planning on doing that. But for methods that would retrieve data from our database for long-running requests, I'm usually passing in the cancellation token just to make it easier on the API if the client decides to abort the operation. Now, what is the cancellation token? Cancellation token is a special parameter type we have at our disposal, along with a couple of other parameter types, like for example the HTTP context. So we can access the HTTP context simply by passing it as a parameter. So HTTP context, and in here access it over here. So we have everything related to HTTP context: connection, features, items, request, user, etc., etc. So this is one of the special parameter types that you could use in your application and you would use from time to time, depending on your circumstances. By convention, it's not really even necessary to pass this in here. You can just pass it as a variable name with a context, and the framework will automatically pick it up for you. And yeah, you have access basically to the same HTTP context over here. So for example, we could use context response, write this thing hello from the context. And yeah, I don't really need this squiggly thingies over here. Yeah, you could do it like this. You can even remove the curly brace, the thingies right here. So just leave it like this even. Yeah, so this is totally valid, and it's really might be a use case you might have. For our API methods, at some point we might want to get the user page, for example, by using command get AP v1 identity, and then over here we could pass in claims principal or claims identity, CP for now, and just access all the properties of the claims principal, which is basically everything user related, which is claims, identities, and identity. Yeah, this is really useful, and we are going to use this in one of our next videos where we will go over the identity part of the Habit Tracker Minimal API. Well, the last special parameter that I wanted to show you today is basically there are two: the HTTP request, where you have access to the HTTP request, and HTTP response. It should come with no question that you have access to these two, since you have access to the HTTP context itself. But yeah, if you need only this two or one of the two, you could have it really easily, just straightforward injected into your API methods. Okay, so this was mostly everything I had in scope for this video. In the next one, we will take a look at middleware and filters. We are still in the introduction phase of the course, so I'm taking things a little bit slower over here, just to give you a general feeling of the concepts of Minimal API and how things work right here. So yeah, stay tuned for more and see you next time.